Remember a couple of weeks ago when the scariest thing in the world is that Elon Musk was going to have access to everybody's income tax records at the IRS? Well, you wouldn't believe who already leaked hundreds of thousands of private tax records. Well, except you totally would. I'll get to that in a second. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. This is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, the House Judiciary Committee released a statement on Tuesday. That's the day we're taping this. It was just a couple hours ago. They said, quote, new disclosures reveals that the Biden IRS, the Biden IRS leaked taxpayer information of over 405,000 Americans and businesses, including President Trump's. The IRS's admission confirms the committee's suspicion and recent reports that show the scope of the leak was much broader than what the Biden administration's IRS originally led the public to believe. In May 2024, an IRS spokesman stated that more than 70,000 taxpayers were affected. Well, we found out it's actually over 405,000 taxpayers. The reason why this came to my attention, because I don't actually follow the House Judiciary Committee on X, believe it or not, I'm not that big a nerd, was that Elon Musk reposted this, and asked, do you trust the government? It's just been one of these revelations after another. So let me ask you, Bill, do you trust the government, and what would it take, if you don't, to win that trust back?
No, and Doge.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I love it when you heard this defense because like you said, it's been a couple weeks now, and you could just hear the panic in their voices. And Elizabeth Warren and others of that ilk, and Schiff and Schumer and all the rest of them are saying, don't you understand? Elon Musk and his bureaucrats are going to have access to your tax information. That's our information that we share with our bureaucrats. It's that's the part of it that I always just seems so transparent to me. You can't allow this man who does in fact work for the government. He's not getting the records for Tesla. This guy who works for the government who's looking into, he may get access to your tax information. We're the only ones who are supposed to know how much money you make and where you spend it and what you donate to and all of the rest of this data. I'll tell you what would interest me, Steve, about this. I'm very serious about this. 400,000 plus records leaked. My understanding is that Donald Trump was one of them. One of the people leaked.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know. The country is more or less very close to being 50-50 Republican and Democrat. And I would be very curious to know if the numbers of the security breach broke down 50-50, or whether or not there was some sort of selection bias in whose records were released and why.
Well, if there was a bias, I imagine now that the House Judiciary Committee has those records, that they'll dig through and let us know. At least I would hope so.
That seems to be my position. I think it just bears mentioning that when we think about the corruption, I think the corruption of the government has been going on for much, much longer than any of us really suspects. Yeah. But the first visible signs, the first signs of the iceberg above the water, were that there was something really politically wrong with the government, was back during the Obama administration, when we found out that the IRS was selectively declining 501c3 status to conservative applicants. You remember that? That was the first
Tea Party organizations.
That's right.
And in Ohio, which was a swing state back in the day.
Right. So that was the first that I'm aware of. That was the first visible sign that the government was playing cards against a half of the American people and defending the other half. And ever since then, with the politicization of Obama's Justice Department under Eric Holder and all the rest of it, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse until January 20th of 2025. And now all of this stuff is going to get uncovered. But I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that the records. So I mean, we could do some simple math, right? I mean, very simple math. Let's just say it was 350,000 records released. 10 times that is 35 million. 100 times that is 350 million. So the chance of Donald Trump's records being randomly one of the ones released in a very big thumbnail sketch is approximately 1 in 100, right? So that's telling me something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just corrupt is absolutely the word. Scott, this is where our new friend Data Republican, small r, comes in. I know I've talked about her in a previous episode, probably a couple of weeks ago, but Data Republican is the one who's put together this impressive database following the money between things like USAID and all of these NGOs that are supposedly nonpartisan and nonprofit, but are instead, just cash cows for the left. Data Republican responded to Musk asking, "Do you trust the government?" She said, "No, I don't trust the government. If the executive branch has limited control over the bureaucracy, and if Congress and the judiciary are compromised by conflicts of interest driven by NGOs, then governance is no longer by we the people. Instead, it has become a self-serving global power struggle, a Game of Thrones rather than a republic." And Scott, that last line hit me hard. How about you?
Well, I am very strongly against the government having anything of mine or releasing it to anybody. I mean, I'm still upset that the TSA took my Swiss Army knife. I mean, they're just the fact that that's in the possession of government bureaucrats infuriates me, and I just keep hoping someday I'll get it back, maybe a class action lawsuit. I think what people don't understand about the Department of Government Efficiency, so-called, is that they are not interested in individual people. They're going after government. They're going after departments. They're going after enterprises that have been set up in unaccountable ways under broad scope authority granted to them by Congress. In many cases, what they're going after is things that should be under the supervision of the executive branch. But over the years, the executive branch has had a tendency to pass off its responsibility to the legislative or to the courts, and the legislative branch, Congress, has had a tendency to pass off its responsibility to entities within the executive branch. So basically saying, okay, we've created this agency, it will have general supervision over these things, and we'll let the agency create its own rules with regard to that. When that executive branch agency creates its own rules, it is making law, which is not authorized by the U.S. Constitution. And so it's not just making internal procedures, but it's actually making law that affects individual people. So I think, it's good to be concerned when anybody is digging through records that could affect the personal information of individual Americans. And so I don't want anybody to stop being skeptical about government. I don't want anybody to say, oh, well, it's because it's my buddy Elon Musk. We trust him. But it is good to keep a healthy skepticism about that and keep an eye on it. As my old journalism professor used to say, who's watching the watchdog? On the other hand, I think you can see a clear difference between the approach that Musk and his team are taking under the president's leadership and the way things have been in the past. And the alarm now being expressed on the left is not about the fact that your tax records might be exposed in some sort of a leak. Clearly, they're not as concerned about that because they've done it themselves in the past. Their real alarm is that by going through the aggregate of the way this organization operates, the IRS operates, they're going to find that there's been a game going on that's against the interests of the average taxpayer for a long time, and that game needs to come to an end.
Yeah, it really does. And it's begun, or at least they've started to begin. Something like that. Borrow from Churchill a little bit there. Wow. I was really disappointed 8 years ago that Donald Trump didn't take my advice for his first term. I wanted him to appoint Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, as I described it, his czar for grabbing the left where it counts and squeezing, because that's what he did in Wisconsin. He went after the left source of money and really made a difference. And Trump didn't do that in his first term, and it showed. Well, now instead of Scott Walker, they've got Elon Musk and the Doge Boys, and they're doing great work so far, so let's keep that going. But I want to talk a bit about that Game of Thrones reference from Data Republican and why that hit me so hard. I've been a bit of a fantasy fan since I was a little kid, and it really didn't matter if it was traditional fantasy, with dragons and knights with broadsword, or sci-fi fantasy, with lightsabers and Millennium Falcon. I really loved it all. And what I didn't realize until I was older was that all fantasy, or at least all Western fantasy, whether it's Chronicles of Narnia or Lord of the Rings, are all founded on a Judeo-Christian ethic, and that is what makes the dragons and the knights and lightsabers and all of that stuff relatable. Is it's grounded in a morality that we all understand, that we're familiar with, and that hopefully we try to practice in our own lives. And that's what I thought was so intriguing about Game of Thrones, at least for the first few seasons. I never read the books. Is that here was a fantasy world stripped of that Judeo-Christian ethic. This was a fantasy world without even the possibility of redemption. And that was so dark that it was really fascinating and gripping. But it eventually collapsed under the weight of its own nihilism. That's why the show fell apart in the last few seasons. You can only keep that up for so long. And that's where Washington is. This is Game of Thrones territory, and a government without redemption is one that is doomed to collapse under the weight of its own amorality, its own nihilism. And Washington needs redemption, and it needs it quick, and hopefully Doge can give that to us, or at least set us on the right path. That's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.